Going Beyond is a presentation of Beyond Housing, helping entire communities become better places to live with RareGem Productions. Reliance Bank, your locally owned hometown bank, is pleased to sponsor today's Going Beyond radio show. With 20 locations throughout the St. Louis area, Reliance Bank is making money a little friendlier.
Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
We're going beyond.
Today on Going Beyond.
On today's show, we're going to continue a conversation that we heard earlier in this year about a fantastic report that came out called For the Sake of All, describing the health disparities in the St. Louis region.
What we were trying to do in the report was really lay out the social determinants of health, which go beyond our normal conversation about health care as the only thing we talk about when we talk about health. There are actually factors outside of medical care that influence health quite a bit, like education, economic opportunity, residential segregation, factors that have to do with where people live, learn, work, and play, and really the unequal distribution of resources for living a healthy life. And it was important to us that this not be another report that just collects dust and sits on a shelf.
Back on the show to join me is assistant professor at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University and the principal investigator of the For Sake of All report, my good friend Jason Purnell. Beyond Housing is going beyond.
That and more ahead today on Going Beyond with Chris Krehmeyer, right after this. Reliance Bank is focused on meeting the banking needs of the entire St. Louis community. That's because Reliance Bank, unlike the big national banks, is locally owned and operated. It's run by people you know, and that's important when you're looking for a personal checking account that's really free, a mortgage, or a loan for your business. So stop in and introduce yourself at one of their 20 branches throughout the St. Louis area. Reliance Bank, making money a little friendlier.
Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
We're going beyond. Welcome to this edition of Going Beyond. I'm your host, Chris Krehmeyer, President and CEO of Beyond Housing. On today's show, we're going to continue a conversation that we heard earlier in this year about a fantastic report that came out called For the Sake of All, describing the health disparities in the St. Louis region. Back on the show to join me is assistant professor at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University and the principal investigator of the For Sake of All report, my good friend Jason Purnell. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be with you.
For our listeners, maybe give a quick rehash on the report, but more importantly, let's talk about what recently happened. We had a community action dialogue that just occurred, but just to take a quick second and kind of go back to, what the report was, what the key findings were, but more importantly, the action item that you and many others in the region are most excited about.
What we were trying to do in the report was really lay out the social determinants of health, which go beyond our normal conversation about health care as the only thing we talk about when we talk about health. There are actually factors outside of medical care that influence health quite a bit, like education, economic opportunity, residential segregation, factors that have to do with where people live, learn, work, and play. And we laid out a set of data, as you said, the report that was released in May, showing everything from a map of life expectancy to how residential segregation, poverty, and mortality due to cancer and heart disease overlap in our region, and really the unequal distribution of resources for living a healthy life. And it was important to us that this not be another report that just collects dust and sits on a shelf. So we are in this second phase of work, funded by the Missouri Foundation for Health, translating our materials into discussion guides and action toolkits that community members can use to take action on the recommendations, our 6 areas of recommendation. And this first one we released at a community action forum at St. Louis Public Radio a couple of weeks ago was on creating economic opportunity for low to moderate income households.
All right, and for our listeners, let's dig in a little deeper in that, right? So again, this idea of creating economic opportunities for everybody in the region, which clearly will have a positive impact on your health outcomes and on how healthy you are. Let's get into the details behind that. So what did that action plan, what did that look like, and what were some of the component parts?
Well, we were very fortunate to have a dynamic panel of speakers at this action forum that really covers much of what we talked about in the discussion guide and action toolkit. We had the City of St. Louis Treasurer Tashara Jones, who was there talking about child savings accounts, and Michael Sherrodden from the Brown School, my colleague, who actually innovated the notion of child development accounts, which are accounts that invest in children and their futures. And you know a lot about this, your work at Beyond Housing with the Promise accounts. We also had the interim president of St. Louis Community College at Forest Park, Roderick Nunn, talking about workforce development, and Ed Bryant from the Minority Business Council talking about entrepreneurship. So really covering a wide range of issues having to do with economic development, economic opportunity, and access to resources for people, because we note, even in our discussion guide, that the unemployment rate is almost 4 times greater for African Americans than whites in the city of St. Louis. And as we say in our materials, a job is a health intervention.
All right, so again, we had some obviously, wonderfully talented and meaningful speakers who bring a wealth of experience. So we talked about a number of different things. So as our listeners now are saying, yeah, okay, I want to be part of, this region getting healthier and stronger. I want to be part of, starting to close the gap and the disparities between the African American population in our region and the majority population in this region. What did the speakers give us some guidance on, and what is the Forsake of All working group kind of giving John Doe citizen? What are the tools? What is the direction that you're trying to give folks in the community so everybody can be a part of this movement to see if we can have, again, some greater equity in how folks are doing?
Well, first of all, we want people to go to the website forthesakeofall.org and click on the tab that says Take Action, where they can find the discussion guide and action toolkit. But some of the specifics of what we talked about, it was very important for us to have a range of activities that people could do. And I talk about these as low risk to high risk. So on the low risk end of things, and for everybody's starting at a different starting point. So this may be very high risk for some people, but just talk about this data. Use our materials. Use the discussion guides to spark discussion in your networks. Watch the Jasmine video that we've produced with help from the 9 Network on animating the Jasmine graphic that we show these 2 life trajectories of a little girl we're calling Jasmine. Talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors, or coworkers about this information. And then to take it a step further, you might consider donating or volunteering to groups that are already doing this work on the ground. And we have several examples in the discussion guide and the resource page that we have. But we also asked people in the room that night, give us other things that are happening in the community that we need to highlight and that people need to know is happening. So this is very much a starting point. We're not saying this is all of the answers. And finally, organizing and advocating with policymakers and decision makers, both locally and at the state level, to tell the people that you elected that creating economic opportunity for everyone is a priority and that they need to enact policies that are consistent with that.
So let's kind of elaborate a little bit more on this idea of having folks, again, talking about this, talking to their neighbors, talking to coworkers, talking to their family. Again, that's forthesakeofall.org, and it's the, what was the link? The Take Action
tab.
The Take Action tab. Let's talk a little bit more about the importance of this, right? Because, some of this is not categorically new news, right? It's sort of been put together in a different kind of way. There is some new data sets, but the underlying ideas here aren't radically new, but they've been framed in a different way. And again, this push for action that you are leading kind of the clarion call to. Let's talk a little bit more about the importance of people understanding the data and then having a conversation about it as a way to move forward in our region.
I think it's crucial. As you say, many of us know some of this kind of intuitively, but I do think that the way the data is presented, and we're hoping it's in a very accessible way, sparks some new conversations for people, and particularly in the moment that we find ourselves in St. Louis right now, where we seem primed at least to be having some of these conversations. We note, for instance, it was very impactful in some of the earlier work that we did where we estimated the number of deaths that were due to poverty and low levels of education. Well, we've updated that data to include everyone in the region, and it's large amount of deaths, 556 due to poverty, 555 due to low levels of education for everyone.
This is people dying, right? This is not just some random, I have a hangnail. This is like people no longer being with us.
Absolutely. And a cost to our region of $7.8 billion associated with that loss of life. So it's not just about African Americans dying for factors that we could prevent if we came together as a community. It's about everyone in our community who's impacted by these issues. So it's incredibly important that people share this information, talk about it, and not talk about it passively, but what are their reactions to it? We have a set of 10 discussion questions to get people started on how they should frame these questions, but there will be additional questions that they'll come up with on their own.
You and I have talked about this, and I've said this in public a number of times. I'll say it again for our listeners. The one of the most dramatic data points in the original report, and I know there's more data even coming up, but from the original report is the lifespan differential between someone living in the Clayton 63105 zip code and the North City 63106 zip code, about literally a 15-minute drive tops, is a staggering 18-year differential.
Yes.
And the first time I saw that, I was just taken aback. An 18-year differential was just a staggering data point to understand, again, the difference in all the systems that are currently in place that lead to, again, health disparities that, by and large, can be rectified if we as a region have the collective courage to tackle it. So, again, when Jason says go to the forsakeofall.org and go into the Take Action tab, it is indeed really important. I don't want to say it's a life or death issue, but when you think about, again, what's happening in our region and in our community, there are lots of things we can and should be doing that can really impact somebody's life in a real and meaningful way.
Absolutely.
So so we have this first community action dialogue that just happened, Jason. So what happens next, right? Because, again, you've been adamant about this is not just a nice report to put on the shelf. This thing is going to stay alive and fluid. So kind of what are some of the next steps and what happens? And again, if our listeners want to get engaged above and beyond, go on to the Take Action tab on the forsakeofall.org website. What else is coming down the pike, and how else can our folks get engaged?
So there will be 5 more of these community action forums over the next 2 years, year and a half to 2 years, on each of the 6 areas of recommendation. The next one will be about the recommendation on investing in quality early childhood development for all children in our region. And there will be additional ones that follow that. We're putting together a strategy for kind of a train-the-trainer set of trainings so that people have some guidance around how to lead these discussions, whether it be in their faith communities, schools, social and civic organizations. So we're trying to build some infrastructure around that, and people should stay tuned for that. And we want to be as supportive as possible of people using this material. And I want to stress coming up with their own creative responses to these recommendations. We don't claim to have cornered the market on all of the ideas about what we can do in our community, and we think there's a great deal of wisdom and creativity in the community around this. And I should say we're working on a youth-focused version of each of these materials as well. So we're very interested in engaging young people and their energy and creativity as well around these issues.
Give us the website one more time, Jason.
forthesakeofall.org.
And if they're interested, there's a Take Action tab that you can click, and you'll see ways that Jason described a few minutes earlier about how you can individually get engaged. There's lots of different ways to do it. It's going to take our entire region. Keep pushing on this to keep saying that we can and we must do better at how we take care of ourselves. Jason Purnell, assistant professor at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University and the lead investigator of the For Sake of All report. Thanks so much for everything you're doing for being on the show again.
Thank you, Chris.
Reliance Bank is pleased to sponsor today's Going Beyond radio show. With 20 locations throughout the St. Louis area, Reliance Bank, your locally owned hometown bank, is making money a little friendlier.
Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
We're going beyond.
Going Beyond is a presentation of Beyond Housing, helping entire communities become better places to live with RareGem Productions. Proudly promoting, presenting, and producing positive programming.
Neighborhood is where you live, and we want to keep it strong and vibrant. This is Chris Krehmeyer with Beyond Housing. We are going beyond.
Chris Krehmeyer, President and CEO of Beyond Housing, located at 4156 Manchester, phone number 314-533-0600. The only organization in in the St. Louis region that offers access to affordable housing. Wherever we work, our goal is to help transform people, families, and communities so that they achieve the skills, strategies, resources, and commitment to succeed for the long term. See our work at beyondhousing.org. Podcast for Going Beyond can be heard, downloaded, and shared by visiting hallelujah1600.com. Listed under the music tab, on demand. Going Beyond is another positive production of RareGem Productions.